Another weird thing about astrology is that it acts as a motivational tool as well as a map for prediction. And this motivational aspect of it, I think, is often thought to be less important or even a negative aspect of astrology, because if the predictive side of it were to be outweighed by the motivational aspect, it's what would usually be used to destroy it, as the validity of its map making abilities. What I mean is, for instance, when you interpret a chart or a transit or something like that, it is very likely for astrologers to usually interpret them in a positive light, in order to give hope to the viewers, right? So even a negative transit, not a negative, even a transit that would traditionally be considered difficult might be interpreted as an opportunity for growth, or an opportunity to learn, or something like that. And if you carry on interpreting charts in this way over many years, it can seem as if astrology is simply a series of self-help kind of motivational videos. Now, I don't think that's all that it is at all. But I also don't think that that's a bad thing, or that there isn't any supernatural aspect to self-help and motivation itself, since it motivates you to follow your will. And when you follow your will, the supernatural seems to become unlocked. Synchronicities seem to constellate around moments when you are entering in alignment with your will, or, individuating, kind of the ego is placing itself in alignment with the self, and stuff like that. So motivation and self-help, I think, is not as mundane as it seems. Now, what I like about this aspect of astrology is precisely the repetitive nature of it. The fact that no matter which transit you're in, you can always find some way to interpret it in a motivational way. Again, these are all things that usually people who want to criticize astrology will use to criticize it. Astrology, or any kind of divinatory practice, right, will be undermined by saying, well, there is so much projection going on that you can't say that you can't really find anything stable, right? That if any aspect can be interpreted in any way, and the abstraction of it becomes so severe, there isn't anything solid to it, right? If, for example, I was going to say let's move to tarot, but let's stick with astrology for a second. If there is a certain a trine between two planets, and it is interpreted as being having something to do with making money or acquiring material or possessions, something like that. That in a lot of horoscopes, and I'm not simple like short horoscopes, but like full length, like video horoscopes, stuff like that. Astrologers will usually interpret these things in a huge variety of levels of abstraction. So, for example, it can be money. Material things can relate to money, but it could also relate to acquiring material goods in the sense of I don't know, an object that you find in the street or something like that. And it could even be like some sort of ethereal like emotion, but that brings you down to earth, or words, some sort of words of guidance that a friend gives you that helps you focus more on the material world. And it is very likely, or almost certain, that everyone will relate to one of those levels of abstraction, in the sense that if one of the situations doesn't apply, then another one will. And again, it's funny because this is used to attack astrology, but I think that the key thing here is that it's ethereal, right? Abstraction is ethereal. There's nothing to hold on to. And I think that's the very nature of what we usually call spirituality, that it's spiritual, it's not material. That it's or at least it highlights that aspect of itself, this spiritual, ethereal side to it, right? This aspect of it not having anything of substance to it, is one of its positive points. In the same way that the I Ching or Tarot or any kind of system can allow you to first get in touch with your unconscious, right? It's a sort of like free association. Abstraction has this sort of free associative aspect to it, where coins or material goods can be connected to non-material things, or it can be connected to situations or people, or a love reading in tarot. It can be a love between romantic partners, but it can also be a love between business partners, or it can also be a love between yourself and your house, how much you love your house. Or at the end, it can reach everything. And so you are going to gravitate towards the thing that you are dealing with, that you didn't know you were dealing with. And so it comes out into consciousness, and you know what the problem is, right? And then it has this motivational side to it, in that most interpretations of it seem to lead towards more of a positive interpretation. Maybe it's that divination lends itself to positive interpretation because it's so non-moral in a sense, right? Everything has a positive and a negative pole to it. And because everything has a negative and a positive pole to it, every planet, every conjunction, everything, because of that, it's as if maybe something about that lends itself to a positive interpretation. I wonder if that's true. I wonder if maybe if you really tried to use astrology in a very like negative, fear-driven kind of way, it would probably prove itself wrong very quickly. Like if you were to interpret certain transit in a completely negative way and say, okay, this transit means that I'm going to lose everything and I'm going to endure terrible pain and I'm going to, all these bad things are going to happen because this is how I'm interpreting the planets in the most negative way that I can, like Saturn, and I'm going to interpret Saturn this way, I'm going to interpret Pluto this way. If you were to do that, that transit would move, it would happen, and most likely you wouldn't, all those bad things wouldn't happen to you, right? Things maybe connected to those predictions would happen symbolically, but they would probably not be as bad as you thought. There would probably be a good side to them. And so that would it's as if the negative interpretation, I'm tempted to say, naturally undermines itself because of the amoral status of archetypes. Whereas the positive interpretation, and again, this is like my bias probably, but the positive interpretation, if you interpret everything positively, also to an extreme, that transit would happen, and you would realize that things hadn't been as good as you had predicted, right? Things hadn't happened in exactly the way that you predicted them to be, but that's where the motivational aspect comes in. That this feeling that good things are going to happen gives hope and therefore motivates you to work towards those things. And so you're putting your work in. Like, it's kind of like with Dumbo, the movie Dumbo, where Dumbo uses a feather as a talisman. He thinks that the feather helps him fly, but actually he is putting most of the effort towards flying, right? It's just that he thinks that he's having this heavenly help. And in some way he is, but I feel as if with motivation you can end up acquiring things, not acquiring as in material things, but you can end up achieving things, which you couldn't have achieved without the motivation. And whereas with fear, I feel as if fear just makes one kind of retreat into like a fetal position. And so, like, in the case of fear, if you expect astrology or divination to be 100%, like, in fear, there is 100% the feeling that whatever is happening is going to happen to you. You have zero power in that situation. Bad things are going to happen to you. And you just have to wait and endure them. Whereas with motivation, if you get the feeling that there is divine help, that somehow the planets are aligned, or the energies of the universe are aligned, or some kind of outside power is working in your favor, then it gets you pumped up to work alongside it. So there is a balance of power. The divine side is working for you, and you are working with it, because there is reason to do so. You're excited by the prospect of things going well. So you're already kind of with the sort of correct disposition to move towards where you want to go. And like in the case of Dumbo and the feather, I think that you end up probably doing more than you think. And it doesn't mean that the divine help isn't there or that it's just a placebo. I think that the divine help is there. I think that the key, at least how I interpret it, is that the divine help is always there. The divine help is always there. It doesn't matter what transit you're in. It doesn't matter which month of the year it is. I think that the divine help is always there. And that's why you can always interpret all transits in a positive way. Even at moments when it feels as if it's hard. That is also divine help. Again, if you consider a trial in your life, a difficult point in your life, to be a situation that you can somehow maneuver and make the most of and flow with, and you feel as if the planets are helping you through that, then you will have more of a motivation to surf with it. If you are the kind of person who responds to this kind of motivation, again, right? A lot of people would watch these kind of videos and just not be motivated at all. There is something about astrology and divination in general that I think appeals to, and this may be a very broad kind of stroke, but I feel that it appeals to people who are finding life difficult, right? It's the classic thing of like, people only pray to God when they're in trouble or stuff like that. That if you're confused and you can't see clearly what you have to do to navigate this confusion, you will likely look to external help, be it gurus or self-help books and stuff like that. And this is very frowned upon, I think, in our culture. And I think that it's unjustly frowned upon. I feel as if it's frowned upon because by doing this, by submitting, not submit, like by giving your power to someone else, to another authority, like instead of making your decisions, you let astrology make them for you, or tarot. You ask questions and see what the I Ching says, see what the divination says. And so you are giving your power away, right? And I think that our culture doesn't like that because it's a very solar culture. It's a culture of domination. It's a culture where the ideal hero of our culture is the authority figure who has full power over their lives. And I think that our culture really rejects this lunar, receptive aspect of allowing the other to take control. And I think that in moments of confusion, there is very little alternative sometimes, right? To following someone else's word. If no words of guidance come up in your head, no decisions are made in your head, then you will follow someone else's decisions. And I think that that's a good thing. I mean, fundamentally, it's neither a good nor a bad thing, but it's just in the same kind of yin-yang relationship to you taking your own decisions. You making your own decisions or you following other people's decisions. There is a dance between these two ways in which you use your power or give it away. That I think our culture doesn't, or there are aspects of our culture that don't like it, I suppose you could say. And so, yeah, I suppose this is enough for now. But anyway, astrology definitely pokes its finger in a lot of these areas. And I think allows for a lot of thought and discussion about this. In this video, I've focused a lot on these more, I suppose, secularly accepted, psychologized aspects of divination, right? This sort of way in which you can project your unconscious onto things and use it as a tool for motivation and all these kind of psychologizing things. But that's one side of it. I totally think there is a spiritual, paranormal side to it as well. And that's what makes it more confusing, because on the one hand, as I said, I think there is something about divination where anything goes. It's ethereal in the sense that any level of abstraction will be valid for any one individual. And so there is no way that a reading won't resonate. And so, you know, that a lot of people will criticize it as being the work of charlatans, right? Because if anything goes, I mean, that's the thing. It's ethereal. It's opposed to like science in like the popular conception of science, in the sense that I think it isn't looking for hard, repeatable results. But at the same time, there are hard, repeatable results within it, right? This is the confusing thing about divination, I think, that on the one hand, there is a mathematical hardness almost to certain things, certain transits, almost sort of like minute by minute, you could track the changes in energy as planets trine and square and conjunct and things like that. Like, you can almost mathematically track the energy as it shifts. But at the same time, there is a completely subjective side to it, in that these mathematical things, these aspects, are manifesting in your life in a way that's individual to you. And so, again, that's the weird thing, because you could say, oh, Uranus in Taurus, you know, it's mathematically objective, right? It happens at 5 p.m., whatever, you know, like at exact time. But even if the time is exact, the interpretation is abstract. The interpretation will have a certain rigidity to it, definitely. And I don't know enough about astrology probably to be talking about this, but I feel as if there is a rigidity, like an objectivity to certain things. But as I was saying with the case of love readings or money readings, money can be symbolic of energy, for example, or love can be symbolic of business relations. Like, there is such an ethereal quality within the rigidity of the archetype. I think that's probably the nature of archetypes, that they seem to be very, very strictly defined. At least like this is what Jung found, I think, as well, that you really are able to define archetypes. You can say there is this archetype and this one, but at the same time, there is such a bleed through amongst them. And in mythology, you can see this clearly, right? You can say Aphrodite and Venus and Ishtar and Inanna and Isis and Persephone, they're all completely different mythological figures, completely different deities, they have different qualities to their stories, and therefore to the energy that they represent or flow with. They're very different, very different deities, but there is such a bleed through as well. There are so many of them who have stories that involve descents into the underworld, for example, or so many of them who are associated to stars. And then you can connect all of this cluster of goddesses to another cluster, maybe, of other mythological figures. And eventually, it's as if there is no foothold, there is nowhere to hold on to at one level, and on the other level, it is the most strict and real structure that you could imagine. So this is a weird alchemical side to it, that